Innovation is in our veins. Soon the whole world will know our names. Sharing our knowledge and freedom reign. We here for the people, you know it's our way. Setting foundations is part of the dream. It doesn't matter if you're new to the game. Listen up now, cause we all gon' say, elevate, 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 higher, elevate, 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 higher. We gon' rise up, we all gon' shine. Work through adversity, stay on the grind. Elevate, elevate, this is our time. Elevate, elevate.
Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, everyone. It's so great to have you all on one more time. It's your boy Josh.
And Reg.
And we're grateful to be back on with you yet again. A Thursday episode dropping on you, homies. What? Did that just happen? Yes, it did. And we're excited to be with you. The lights are going out. The electricity is amazing and pertinent right now. We have a guest with us today, which we're super excited. Jennifer Elle, Indigenous Politico on TikTok, Jennifer Elle on Twitter, who is just beaming with knowledge on politics and has done a lot of amazing work within the Indigenous community, but as well as just her knowledge of politics is unreal, and she's been skyrocketing to incredible levels on social media with just the stuff that she shares. Very knowledgeable, knows what she's talking about. The reason why you brought her on is because, well, it helps us learn more, because we clearly don't know what we're talking about on the show half the time. So glad to have someone on the show who is. Jennifer, great to have you on. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Not too bad. We were super excited to have you. And we said we came across your TikToks. We're excited about what you bring. And we're obviously at a really weird time that's a little, I don't know, spicy. And so you obviously can't make everyone happy all the time, but what's it been like for you so far, just trying to navigate the social media stuff and then trying to just share bipartisan information in general of what's happening in politics in the country?
I think you don't have to look very far to figure out what kind of atmosphere it is. I think in every video, this is a wild ride, because it truly is. Like, some days I'll be like, oh, am I going to have enough content to make this week? But then something ridiculous happens and it's like, here we go again. I have something to talk about. So it's interesting day by day.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of rewind a little bit. We got some questions we're going to start off with. Reg, hit us up.
Yeah. So my big thing is this. How did you get into this kind of work, and like, what is your why? Like, when you think about all the different things that you've been talking about, I know you said it's a wild ride, and we've been feeling exactly the same way, where it's just, you think that you've seen it all, and then you see something else and you're like, wow, I didn't know that we could top that. But beyond just kind of the shock value of it all, just kind of what is it that you're hoping to do with the work that you're doing?
My biggest thing, especially for joining TikTok, was connecting with the youth voters, the 18 to 35. That to me is one of the most important places. And I know I get criticism from people all the time for even being on TikTok. And it's like, I don't care. That's where all the young people are hanging out. So that's where you're going to catch me. And getting those young people involved in politics, but also interested in politics. Because as you know, Twitter, there's no nuance on Twitter, and everyone's kind of stuck in their own echo chambers. But I found with TikTok, my content is reaching so many different people. And if you scroll through my comments, people are saying, wow, I wasn't interested until I listened to you. And so that really puts it into perspective for me and keeps me going.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that was kind of one of the things that happened when I came and started talking to Josh about a lot of these different issues, was just, it felt like there was no space for people to actually just talk and just have a conversation that didn't feel like it was leaning one way or the other. So it is really about, just having a space to just talk about the craziness and feeling out what people are thinking, and then kind of getting that feedback again through the different social media channels. So I love that. That's awesome. And thank you for doing the work that you do.
Yeah, at least for me too, where, I've been interested in politics ever since a young age. Honestly, it's always been interesting. I think the more so when I got really engaged in it probably would have been the Paul Martin years. And then the Stéphane Dion and the Liberal Party was kind of like, I don't know, we're going to put in front of them to beat Stephen Harper. And then eventually you got the old shoe in with Justin Trudeau and said, we got the Trudeau era. We got you. And he came in. And so, politics have always kind of some interest to me in general. And then obviously it's just increased since. And the one thing I've really liked about your content in particular is obviously it's super informed. The nuance you break into is amazing. And the fact you're doing this daily updates on what's happening in Canadian politics is, first off, I commend you, because we just do one show a week and it's so hard on the head to keep up with all the things that are going on. How do you do it? How do you keep up with just the updates of what's happening, but as well as kind of maintain your own sanity and your mental health through all this?
That's a really good question. For me, honestly, I'm in a unique position where working with nations and working as a consultant, it is very beneficial for me personally to know what is happening with the federal government. That's where a lot of my issues fall federally rather than provincially. So for me to be paying attention is crucial to the work I do. If there's announcements or things going on that affect nations and things like that, I need to know about that. But for me, I'm a neurodivergent brain. I have ADHD. I retain a ton of information, which is why I went to school for so long. So retaining that information, and honestly, it takes me a couple minutes to put out a video. And just lately, I taught myself how to use like video editing software so I could do some cool little things with my videos, like put captions and stuff like that. But again, it only takes an extra few minutes, and I have a very supportive family and 2 kids that aren't super big fans of having to be quiet when I'm filming. But again, it doesn't take very much time. So
how long does it take for you to do one of these videos? I'm curious.
Like today, my political update series videos, those ones honestly probably like under 10 minutes. Like I am one of those people who I will just film it and I'm not going to retake it a bunch of times. I'm just filming it because if I have to watch myself back, I'm done. I'm not posting it. I cringe myself out and that's it. So I just film it and I'm like, okay, it's good. It's fine. And I just put it out there. So.
And we're rolling with it.
Yeah.
And I think one last question I had before I switch it back here to Reg was dealing with the political tensions currently going on in the country, right? Where politics has always been contentious in general, but it feels like it's just ratcheted up a notch over the past 3 years or so since, the COVID epidemic or pandemic, I should say. What's it been like for you as a politico trying to navigate the hyperpartisanship and dealing with just the vitriol that comes from both sides of the aisle or 3 sides of the aisle for you and just trying to be informed and try to inform others of what's happening?
It's been interesting. I would be lying if I said that I have thick skin and that there hasn't been tough days because there has been. I've, published articles in the National Post, and that I guess was my turning point of like the depths that people will go to like dox me or put me down or, do everything they possibly can to silence my opinion. One thing I also didn't take into consideration is that my identity was going to be dragged through the mud every time I entered the political arena. So being an Indigenous person in politics and maybe not having the mainstream view of what current day liberals think I should have, I've been swimming against the tide. So, I'll put an opinion out there on Twitter or whatever it might be, and I'll have an obvious liberal supporter, I can tell by their page, come at me immediately and be like, you're Indigenous. How could you think this way? And it's like, oh, wow. Okay. Now, and not only am I defending my position, I'm also defending my position as an Indigenous person as well. And that's been tough. There's been days where I've been like, oh, is this even worth it? But at the same time, it's my creativity, and I enjoy doing it. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. I totally get that because I was saying to Josh earlier that so my wife is Indigenous and her mom was actually an Indigenous activist in Toronto and has spent many times outside of INAC protesting for different reasons and causes. And one of the things that she found was that she was getting all this like hate about like, oh, you must be, a fake Indigenous and you're not living into your nation and so much stuff. And she's like, check my birth certificate. Here's my status card, and also that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm out here doing what I'm doing. And so, yeah, definitely commend you for the work that you're doing, especially in that idea. And I'm just wondering, like, one of the things that I noticed that she actually went through was actually some like tension from her community, from her nation. And I'm just wondering, like, do you find that you have any like issues with like dealing with some of these political hot topics and then, doing the work that you do with your nation?
No, actually. I think number one, because when I show up into the rooms to do the work that I do, my partisanship ends. Like I'm there to do the work that I'm there to do. And that's either advancing nations or whatever I'm hired to do. And I'm not there to shove my opinion down anyone's throat or anything like that. But I am very well supported in my life by pretty much everybody, my family, my nation supported my way through school. They were, my chief showed up the day I convocated. My boss, the one that hired me for the firm that I work for, same thing. He follows my social medias. I've been very fortunate to be supported in what I do. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. But when you talk about, being an activist and facing questions to your identity and stuff like that, at the end of the day, I'm just like everyone else. We're not grown up with a handbook. Like we're not told this is what being a proper Indigenous person is all about. We're all just trying to make it out here. So.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, that's actually kind of one of the things I was thinking about too, is just, when you're thinking about like this discussion of like, I'm just a person, I have my thoughts, I have my ideas, I have my dreams, my aspirations, and looking at this kind of stuff. What do you see as kind of like, your guiding light when you look at kind of these nation to nation relationships with like Canada proper, and then the nations that you work with, I guess?
For me, it's about making the change for the future. I don't think that I claim to know everything, and I think that's why I enter rooms and I'm more of a listener than I ever will be a speaker. And people would probably be shocked to even know that I make social media content, because I'm usually quite quiet when I'm in those rooms. But for me, it's about not changing the course of our beliefs or our cultural norms, but for me, it's just setting that path, right? Like I have 2 daughters that look up to me, and I was an Indigenous kid that grew up in a unique lifestyle without a mom and a dad present, and, went through the foster care system for a little bit of my life. And for me, it's like, I got where I am today, but how did I get here? And how can I show other Indigenous kids that there is opportunity out there, and people like me can be the ones to help them find that?
Yeah, definitely. We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? It takes a community.
Absolutely. And
For sure.
this is kind of one question I've always been intrigued by, because typically, even you have Mr. Diefenbaker behind you there. In most election cycles, most political leaders will have something to then kind of some type of olive branch of some sort during their campaign to the Indigenous community in Canada. Trudeau, that was a big part of his campaign when he got in. It seems like from time to time, from what I've just even the cycles I've seen, it's a lot of play in terms of talk of this is what we'll do for the Indigenous community, and then the promises fall short. What's it been like for an Indigenous community just hearing the same thing over and over again, yet people like yourself, you're representing your community, you want to do good things for it, and you still keep coming back to the table to talk with these politicians who you just there's been a lack of action in the past. What kind of goes through your mind there, and what keeps you keep coming back and trying to have those good relations?
For me, the biggest thing is there's a lot of talk. And if one thing I can remember Justin Trudeau by, that is the fact that he came in with big promises and big dreams and a lot of conversation. And one thing I will commend him for is that the fact that he was bringing Indigenous issues to the forefront and was making it okay for the federal government to actually talk about those issues and make it seem like a priority. Whether or not it's been a priority is a completely separate conversation. But we saw during the Harper years that things were not prioritized. And not only were they not prioritized, they were introducing legislation that was bulldozing over consultation, meaning like the Jobs and Growth Act, for example. And that kickstarted Idle No More, where Indigenous people were fighting back. And they were like, no, you're not just going to make decisions without consulting with nations across the country. So I definitely think that that's something I'll remember Justin Trudeau by for sure.
Just kind of like thinking about how does the Indigenous community kind of engage in the political realm? Because I'm just still thinking about that idea that, these are people like, again, who've heard the same platitudes, who've heard the same promises, then no action. And then, like you said, then you have governments who actively put in legislation that works against them. So like you said, that brought about Idle No More. How do you see the Indigenous community kind of working with government, or actually even engaging in the political sphere at all? Like, I know that there's a lot of people that I know in the Indigenous community that have just kind of like given up on it, and in the non-Indigenous community as well. But I'm just wondering, where there's that extra layer of barrier, I think. I'm just wondering how you kind of see that happening. How do you see like the Indigenous community moving forward within the political sphere?
That's a really interesting question. And it's also a tough one to answer, because when I think of mainstream politics in Canada, and I also think about Indigenous politics, there are a bunch of moving parts, meaning that our nations are not just concerned with how to make a change with the federal government, but also manage their own communities. We're seeing a lot of self-governance happening where nations are moving into a place where they don't want to be reliant on the federal government. They want to create ECDEV opportunities for themselves and move themselves away from that. We saw Whitecap Reserve outside of Saskatoon become one of the first ones to move out of the Indian Act. But then there are people that recognize the fact that we need to work with them as long as we're under the Indian Act. That's our legal binding document, right? So people like me getting involved, whether it be activism or running in politics or lobbying, consultants, whatever it might be, that's bridging that gap. That's what's going to be necessary, and holding their feet to the fire so that they know they can't just make decisions, because there's going to be a whole new generation of Indigenous people participating in politics and making sure that we are also considered while those decisions are being made.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that actually even looking to the province next to you, when you see that that's the first Indigenous premier in the provinces, because I know the territories have had some Indigenous leadership, but in the provinces, I think that they're probably going to look at that and go, oh, we have a space in this game. We can actually play in this game too. So
I'm also curious too with that election that happened. People get caught up on the stripes. They get caught up on the colors. What I've seen from him so far has just been I hate to say it because the federal conservative coined this term for this upcoming cycle, but it's just common sense. The fact he voted in favor of like the carbon tax relief on heating, on heating is awesome to see. The federal NDP couldn't bother to vote against it. So what's it been like just from a community perspective to see him in power, and also just trying to kind of ignore the stripes that are associated with it?
Yeah, so I obviously did a video on this on TikTok and also tweeted about it on Twitter today. And there's been feedback of people saying, how can you support him because of his past and stuff like that? But I think all of the personal stuff aside, we're seeing an NDP leader, again, that's speaking common sense. Right in his victory speech, he had some really strong words. Like, he came out talking about responsibility, self-responsibility for Indigenous people, which we are seeing. I'm one of those people that literally had to take responsibility for my life. There was no one that was going to hold my hand through it. I had two choices to make. And I made the one choice that was going to better my family, go to school, stay away from partying, and put my priorities in order. And that's what he came out saying. And not only did he say that, he also took the NDP approach, which was to back it up with promises of making sure those social supports are there. So he's not, he almost came out with that more conservative tone, but then was like, but wait, here's where we're going to come in with those social supports. So when you are ready to get help, we will be there to help you. And then also at the Premier's meeting today, taking a stance against the carbon tax exemption, and saying that Manitoba wants to be treated fairly. I'm like, yeah, that's like, doesn't even have to be a party stripe thing. Any premier that's standing up should be saying that because it makes sense. So.
Absolutely. The idea of standing up for constituents is sadly foreign these days, but it's amazing how it can work. Do you have any questions before we move on?
No, I just thought it was kind of funny when we saw that the Newfoundland member of parliament there, he had voted against the carbon tax originally, and then today we saw him vote in favor of it for the rest of Canada. I was like, there is something to be said about standing up for constituents, but then at the same time, you need to keep that integrity for everyone. But I don't know if you had watched that or witnessed that, but I just thought that was kind of funny.
When you do see that, now we're talking for fun. Now we're going back and forth. What were your thoughts when you saw that flip on his end?
Yeah, I saw him also, I think, give the finger. That's what hit the mainstream media, because he was getting heckled because like conservatives were watching him flip-flop essentially. But they're in the fight for their lives right now. They're trying to save their seats, and Canadians have a front row view to what politicians look like when they're flailing and they're drowning. So.
And I think you called this out too, which I thought was hilarious, where you called out the whole the heating oil carbon tax relief for what it was. You're buying votes. A lot of people didn't like that you said that, but you said you kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit and how actual politics works in this country. Unfortunately, it's just it's the nature of the beast. It's not really about trying to do what's best for people. You're trying to do what will ever bring them to your favor. What was kind of you What was kind of the blowback for you when you kind of did that video?
I don't know. I didn't see too many negative comments, but again, I think that they kind of get filtered towards the bottom. But for me, it was like, this is common sense. And maybe I'm not going to sit all day online fighting with people on TikTok. I'm sure I'll probably do it on Twitter. But like, to me, it's like, you guys, this is the government. There are many, many policy analysts that are involved in these decision making. I would know. I am a policy analyst. And I know that there's many thinking heads that sit around and decide how to formulate a policy. Carbon tax was one of Trudeau's biggest policies to date. If this wasn't about buying votes, he would have had that tiered approach to begin with, saying, okay, you know what, we're going to put that carbon tax on our biggest emitters in Canada, oil and gas companies, whatever it might be. But no, it was a blanket approach for everybody. And now they're coming in like the heroes they are and saying, well, you know what, actually, Atlantic Canadians have it really tough, home heating oil, the whole thing. And they're like selling it in the House of Commons. And I'm like, if it was that great, you would have did it before you saw your polling numbers, which are scaring you, obviously.
And you're doing the updates of the polling currently, and that's where you're getting people all kinds of fired up, because that blue line is growing and that red line is receding. What do you see is on the horizon for both the Liberal, the Conservatives, and the NDP party at the federal level over the next 2 to 4 years? What do you see happening?
There's going to be a lot. As someone that's been involved with politics for quite some time and has watched governments change, this is what the end of the government looks like. That's just what it is. And I like to do the polling updates, not because I'm trying to sell anyone a fake reality of what the current modern day looks like, but more so that people understand, okay, with this Atlantic Canada messaging, what does that actually look like in the polls, and what does that formulate to with the numbers? And for me, it's like, I like watching it. And, I get blowback, people saying, well, the Conservatives were ahead in the 2019 and 2021 elections. Look how that turned out. It's like, yeah, they were never ahead like this. They were ahead enough to make sure that Trudeau never got into another majority government, but they were not ahead like this. And so the other day I was like, you know what? I'll take some historical data and throw it in there to show people that that gap has widened so significantly. I never want to speak on 100% certainty because it would go against everything I know as someone that studies data and analyzes it. But I think we're seeing a Conservative majority government on the horizon. I think we're seeing the Liberals knock down to an opposition like the Conservatives had to deal with in 2015. And the NDP, I don't know what's happening there, but they need to figure it out.
I love that. Yeah, I think I'm curious though. What is it more? Is it messaging of Poilievre, or is it the mess ups of the Trudeau government? What do you think is affecting that separation more?
It's both. I think the Liberal government has dropped the ball so significantly on a number of issues. I think they really were hoping that COVID would be their winning thing to drive them back into that majority, and unfortunately it wasn't there. Trudeau's been kind of divisive on a number of issues, and I'm not someone that ever goes too far to the left or too far to the right on certain issues. And if I can see that it's divisive, I know that the rest of normal thinking people are thinking the same thing as me, where they're like, he kind of took a weird stance on that and I don't really like it. But for me, I think that Pierre is talking simple language for people that don't really understand. No, I don't want to say that don't understand politics, but aren't paying attention to politics. He really speaks to people that, you know what I mean? Like non-politicals. Like I have friends that are non-political that don't care, but his videos are like, I understand that. Or yeah, that makes total sense. I don't like that Trudeau's doing that. Whereas Aaron O'Toole, I felt overcomplicated everything, and I'm not seeing that out of Pierre.
And I actually would totally agree with you on that. As someone who since 2015, I wasn't fired up about the election of Trudeau, but I was like, all right, he's in, give him a shot. Let's see what happens. By 2019, I was like, all right, this guy's got to go. I'm not a huge fan of him. But I wasn't a fan of Andrew Scheer either. I didn't think he was the answer. And then I felt the exact same way about O'Toole in that next election, where I'm like, these guys are not the answer because their messaging is not on point. Poilievre, I also, I found myself loving Poilievre. I've been following him since 2016, 2017, and I loved him more and more. And then as things started ramping up with the COVID stuff, and then the trucker convoy, and then the Emergencies Act invocation of that, and Poilievre kept coming. He kept coming. And I'm like, I like it. I love what he's saying. This is awesome. Wait a second. Why am I agreeing with everything he's saying? I don't like this. I don't like this at all. What is happening? His messaging is almost too on point, and it almost makes me a little nervous of what's actually going to happen if he gets power. Do you feel the same way at all?
Yeah, I do. And I also think that that feeling that you're having with Poilievre is a brand that he's been building for a long time. There's only been one other MP that I can think of off the top of my head that has connected with people that way, and that's Michelle Rempel-Garner. And people might disagree with that because she's kind of not as mainstream as she used to be. But any day of the week, I think she still does it, where she would go on Facebook Live and just tell people what happened and just be like, yeah, this is what happened. There's no flowery political language that's pre-approved by the whip or whatever. It's just, hey, you're my constituents. This is exactly what happened today. Pierre did that, and now that he's leader, he's doing it on a much bigger scale. And I think that's what's resonating with people.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was exactly what I thought with like the Aaron O'Toole situation when he was there. And I was just like, I'm not interested in what you're saying. And then when I was following Pierre, that was exactly where I was like, oh, this is simple. This is easy to communicate. And then a lot of the times that I found that I was like, I felt really interested in him was when he was talking to the media and not falling for a lot of their gotcha moments. And because we all know that that's exactly what they're there for. They're there for that moment that they can throw on a headline and put out there. And he just was not giving it to them. And so I was saying to Josh before that, you know, watching some of these moments, you're like, oh, wow, like he's really got it down. And then I was like, I don't know if that's scary, because then it's like evil plus power. Is that good? Because we got incompetence plus evil right now. And it's like, oh, but yeah, just even thinking about your upcoming one-on-one with Poilievre, what are the things that you're most curious about when you talk to him?
I haven't figured that out quite yet. I want to keep it Indigenous focused, because obviously I've ran into him a couple times. He came to Saskatchewan, met him twice here, met him at the convention, obviously, or didn't meet him, but there was pictures being taken at the convention, and then ran into him at the airport, and then that caused a whole thing with WestJet. So haven't had a chance to actually have a conversation with him yet, but I think that there's just going to be a couple questions that I want to ask about how he's going to connect with Indigenous communities. And also, I really structured my ask to meet him as I would like to give him some advice. I'm
just thinking about, his whole stance of like just plain simple answers and language and stuff like that. I wonder what that will look like, especially because we know that we've been noticing a lot of times that when he does give out any kind of like hints to what he might do in power, it seems like the Liberals kind of come in and just take that. They're like, oh, that's a good idea. We'll borrow that. So I'm wondering what that might look like. So we'll be eagerly watching for that interview for sure.
Absolutely. And so I think kind of along those lines with this meeting with him, like, I know you said it, you're not ready, haven't kind of thought through it just yet, but I'm curious, with someone like yourself who's got a lot of experience in politics and about to have, a one-on-one with a man to discuss the needs of your community, how do you, like, we know the political game's slimy. You give ask a question, you're not going to get a direct answer. How do you kind of frame and get ready to get those follow-ups to make sure you try to get as much information out of that time as possible?
I think just allowing the conversation to be as neutral as possible and as cavalier as possible. I think there's far too many young people that get into politics and they're just like, they're too much. They're too much. And ensuring that trust is there. I have had the opportunity to meet a couple of Pierre's senior staffers. His director of policy is one of them. I've actually got to have lunch with him last December when I was there for AFN. And I just kind of, we had a very casual conversation. And, one of my areas of expertise is the water crisis in Canada. And I'm like, here, allow me to just verbally tell you everything I know in an hour. But just opening up those doors for opportunity to have those conversations and hoping that he remembers it or follows through with it. So,
right. It's almost kind of a gentle pressure that's kind of relentlessly applied. You won't get the big swing, the grand slam in that one conversation, but at least if you can drop some knowledge in and keep trying to push as you go, especially as someone who's as involved as you are, you'll get those opportunities again. which I think it makes sense what you talked about when young people, such as ourselves, they get a little fired up. They get really into it because in some ways, at least I can relate to this feeling. If I have ever had an opportunity to do maybe a one-on-one with Justin Trudeau, I could see why I would get fired up, only because I'm probably not going to get this opportunity again. So I'm going to try and cram everything in that meeting as possible. And I probably at least a lot of people get emotional, not getting the information they're getting. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah.
Love that.
So on that note, then, what would your advice be for other people who are younger and might be, wanting to talk to an elected official like yourself? What would be your go-to advice for them?
Just do it. Like a lot of young people are intimidated to get into politics, and the reason I know that is because there's not a lot of involvement. I live in a riding where my MP wins with almost 70% of the vote, and there's a lot of opportunity here to just get involved, and it's like pulling teeth trying to get volunteers and stuff out. But yeah, the more involved and the more kind of in the know that you get, the more comfortable you'll be talking to politicians. And they're literally people. I've spent so much time with politicians over the course of the last 5 to 6 years that I'm like, whatever. Like, I'll DM with MPs on Twitter, and sometimes they'll laugh at my tweets like in private. And it's just, yeah, they're people.
Good to know. And I think that's great advice. And I think kind of getting back to more political strategy here. Over the next 2 years, at least at this point, you said there's been a lot of big issues that are coming to the forefront and getting the attention of the regular person. What do you see? Like you said, obviously we see the Conservatives kind of just making that gap wider and wider. Do you think there's in any world possible where the Liberals can flip that and try to at least at the minimum get back a minority government for 2025?
With Trudeau at the helm, I don't know. But one of the things that you're always taught in politics is to never underestimate your opponent, ever. Never, ever, ever underestimate your opponent. Never, like I said, I live in a 70% of the vote riding. Still, you door knock like you need to win. You pound signs like you need to win. You make those phone calls like you need to win, because you never, ever underestimate. With that being said, there's been a lot of conversation around universal basic income. I'm sure you've seen the million comments that I get wanting me to talk about it. I would not throw that away, that could be a potential election issue where the Liberals come in with a big promise because they have to. They have no choice now. The 2021 election was centered around keeping Canadians safe from the pandemic. The next election is going to be around how we can help you out of the current situation that you're in.
Okay. So I think you're right about the messaging, 100%. I can see that where that's going. Someone who's like me, I get frustrated with that, right? Because I'm like, from my perspective, y'all created it and now you're giving me the solution. Do you think people the regular person could see through that, or do you think they would buy into that messaging?
It really depends. Like, I kind of go back to my statement about a lot of people not paying attention and how they pick up on messaging. When we get caught in these political bubbles, it's really, really easy for us to get complacent with the fact that the average Canadian doesn't care as much about politics to watch it and pay attention to question period every single day as you or I would. So, they kind of only see, okay, you know what, life is getting really expensive. Okay, I am seeing in the news that like Trudeau's not showing up to the House of Commons and he's talking about things that don't matter. Okay, but he's, promising me now he might be able to fix it. So maybe we'll be okay. Also, big promises like universal basic income aren't really the end all be all for working Canadians and people that are middle class or, maybe students or our less vulnerable population. But at the end of the day, he's going to need to do something to pick up those votes with the older range, because we're seeing the support for him at the younger folks is going in droves. And 40-year-old, 50, 60-year-old people are ready to retire. They're thinking about retirement. Universal basic income is not the end all be all for them either. So it's hard to say.
I totally agree with you. I think that UBI isn't the thing that's going to get that age group. And I think that that's exactly why we saw like him going for the home heating oil, because I was looking at it because I also just had a daughter this year. And so we're looking at our income going, okay, this is probably going to be the lowest amount of money we'll ever make this year. would we qualify for the free heat pumps and for all the different incentives that they put out there? And we're like, how is the median income this low? And we're like, we don't qualify, even though we both took EI to be with our daughter. And yeah, we were just like, we don't qualify then. And I was looking into this going, who would qualify for this? And it's seniors who are on fixed incomes, who are only getting that that CPP check and the old age benefit. And so those are the people who, you know, they bought their house back when it was only, you know, $100,000 to buy a house. And so now they need to upgrade from home heating oil. So, and those are the people that get out and vote. And so it's like, that is who he's speaking to. It's directly that demographic in Atlantic Canada. So I'm thinking that, you know, maybe Pierre's got to come back with something else for the younger Canadians, like you said, the working class, to try and get that vote. Because I think that group of people is, like you said, they're not paying attention. And I don't know if it's for lack of desire or if it's just because I'm just from the people that I'm talking to and I'm hearing from, people are just tired. They're busy. They've got families. They've got, you know, never ending work. The amount of people that are actually now working 2 jobs to try and keep up with inflation and keep up the lifestyle that they've had and enjoyed before is just insane. So I just think that people might be a little bit overburdened right now. And so that's also kind of where I think a lot of the work that you do is like super important, because it is getting that message out there. But yeah, I'm just wondering, what do you think that Pierre will come back for that group of people, that to get them? Because if Atlantic Canadians, the bulk majority of them that are old, are now going, sweet, we got free heat pumps and a discount on our oil, we're going to go with the old red team. What do you think that Pierre's message is going to be to Atlantic Canadians, maybe?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have no idea. I'm in Saskatchewan, so I'm kind of a little bit out of touch with what happens in Atlantic Canada or the different needs that people, like, I didn't even know that many people were on heating oil, that the amount of people in Saskatchewan is very, very low. So obviously the needs are very different. But with that being said, it's like, you know what? If he scraps that carbon tax, okay, that's an extra cost that people don't want to have to pay. But then, you know, brings in some other promises like tax breaks and stuff like that and starts making life more affordable again, then maybe people will be happy. But I think where the Liberals are making mistakes is they keep trying with these big promises, like we saw with the grocery rebate and the carbon tax rebate. It's like people are like, okay, yay, but like, I don't want to have to pay carbon tax on my bill and then wait for it to come back to me. And then listen to these people in the House of Commons tell us that we're doing better than we ever have been. Like, you know, I think Canadians are ready for someone to just be honest with them. Like, just be honest. Just tell us where we're at.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I realized that I kind of set you up for failure there, being from the prairies, me being from Atlantic Canada. But I'm wondering, maybe then, to kind of take the same question, what do you think that it's going to take for Pierre to kind of win, like maybe the Indigenous vote, but then also kind of the vote of Saskatchewan individuals? I know that, you know, Saskatchewan goes pretty blue often anyway, but I know that in the metropolitan areas, you kind of have a little mix there of colors. But yeah, just wondering, what do you think his messaging is going to be to your ridings?
My thing here, I think, is the farmers with the carbon tax. That's one of the biggest things. And I know there's some bill that's passing through right now with some exemptions. I have friends that are farmers. I don't know 100% about it. I live in conservative country. That's just the way it is. So I know that we're not going to get a lot of big and bold promises for Saskatchewan with our 14 seats. As far as the Indigenous community, I don't want to sell the Indigenous vote short by assuming or thinking that I know what would be best to be offered. One thing that I think would be best is making sure that Indigenous communities have the tools necessary to pursue economic development opportunities. Like with the Liberal government, we saw last year, they came out with the emissions cap because they just assume that all Indigenous communities are against oil and gas, and they're not. You know, we saw 23 First Nations buy into the Enbridge pipeline deal last year. So making sure that those communities have the resources and tools necessary to participate in the resource sector, which means money back in their nations for sports, like rinks, buying skating rinks on nations is huge. We have a a lot of young kids that love to play hockey. And as you know, like with the broken window theory, we need to invest in our communities to keep our kids out of trouble and keep them busy and healthy. So ECDev opportunities are huge. And actually, one of the first promises that Pierre made as leader was revenue resource sharing for nations that participate in the resource development sector. So that was huge.
Another question, I'll kind of going off of that, is you see this down south a lot in their politics, where they treat the black vote like this is the black vote. Can you win it? And then they just all have the same problems, and we're gonna have the same solution that's gonna help all the black people. And I find we treat the Indigenous population very similarly up here. It's like you treat them as a block of voting. How do you kind of cut through that messaging? And I know that you kind of get put in a tough spot because you want to look after your community, but you also, like you said, like you don't want to be speaking on behalf of all Indigenous people. How do you kind of find that balance as you go into these conversations with these politicians?
Oh, it's tough. The Indigenous vote is very tough because we are so diverse. The needs of what my community might need in southern Saskatchewan is going to be so different than a nation that is in Atlantic Canada, where we have nations in Saskatchewan that are remote. Like they are remote, fly-in only, or ice roads or whatever it might be. Whereas in Atlantic Canada, it's not like that. They're 100 kilometers away from an urban center. So for politicians to be able to reach out to us is tough. I think the best way is for politicians that get elected that understand how to reach out to those communities. I think the Liberals have done a little bit of a better job than historically the Conservatives have. I know the Conservatives are trying and they're making those amends, because I know nations that have met with Conservatives. I know our Northern Saskatchewan MP here, Gary Vidal, he has paved the path for Conservative MPs that are not scared to, not infiltrate, but show up to communities wherever it might be. He gets elected mostly by the rural part of his riding, but it doesn't matter. He'll take flights up north, or he's got someone that's a mobile constituency assistant, kind of the first in the country, to just travel around his riding and make sure that those constituents are heard. And you know what? Maybe in the last few elections, he didn't win the polls in those areas, but it doesn't matter. Reaching out anyway. Sometimes the path to reconciliation is long and you don't always see immediate results, but building that relationship and doing the right thing is always the right thing to do. So
generally interested because obviously being in Saskatchewan and the battle and the fight that's happening between Mr. Moe and Justin Trudeau. Where do you land on that? And how do you feel like, Moe's, his attempt or the way he's going about his relationship with Trudeau and just trying to make sure Saskatchewan voices are heard. How do you feel about his strategy with his relationship with the federal government?
I think Scott Moe is taking a very strategic approach. I think he's listening to the people that vote him in. Obviously, there's a lot of NDP supporters in Saskatchewan that can't stand him and think he's not doing enough to bridge that gap. But all you have to do is live in Saskatchewan for a little bit and understand that the federal government doesn't really care. We don't have enough seats. We're not a make or break it for elections. So I think he's just ensuring, that our needs are heard, especially, you think about the population of Saskatchewan being, I think it's like 1.2 million, maybe I'm off by that. And then you think of the number of people that are employed in Saskatchewan, and then our biggest resources here that actually pay for our roads and hospitals and schools, like agriculture and potash and mining. If our federal government is not acknowledging or prioritizing those resources, then our premier has to step in and say, listen, you're hurting the people that are making our province go round. And those are the farmers and the people that work in the northern mines and everything in between. So
I've personally been interested in kind of how the aggressive approach that he's been taking. And just in general, I think he was the first premier, from my understanding, who just really took a strong stance against the federal government, which in my lifetime, that's the first time I've really seen this type of battle between a province and the federal government. And I guess my question that kind of links back to something a little bit earlier, I just forgot to ask it, was with, like you said, with Trudeau at the helm, there's no way they're going to make up this gap. And there's talks of a Mark Carney coming in and, dealing with the ship. Do you think they'll make that change before the next election? And if they do you think he can do enough to stem the loss they're going to receive?
It's hard to say. And I know, people always say, like, why isn't he leaving? Why isn't he leaving? And why aren't the Liberals doing anything about it? Trudeau was very strategic in everything that he's done. He's not stupid. The entire Liberal brand is Trudeau. You look at their internship program or the last election, every election sign had Team Trudeau on it. Trudeau is the future and brand of the Liberal Party. So without him, they're rebranding themselves. Conservatives have always taken a different approach. I mean, I don't even think like the ballots were even counted and everyone was already calling for Erin O'Toole to step down because conservatives take a much different approach on everything. But I feel like the Liberals would have really benefited from, I don't want to say taking advice from conservatives because literally like our leader underperforms and we're like, see ya. But just holding that feet to the fire, like I have never seen partisanship like this in my entire life. And I'm not super old by any means, but like I also wasn't a diehard conservative when Harper was losing, but he's got some fans that like spend all day, every day defending him to an absolute fault. And maybe the MPs are scared of those people too. I don't know.
I think that's totally fair. I don't know. So this is a fun question. I definitely want to have this question for you because you have the authority to push back on this 100%. But I've tended to start taking this perspective because you just brought this up with, the branding of the Trudeau name. I find that Trudeau, I've always kind of said that he's the left-wing version of Trump. And I know it's a spicy thing to say, but I find that he's got his diehards. And it's the most like I've seen a leader galvanize a people, if I'm being honest. I wasn't around the Pierre Elliott Trudeau days, so I can't really speak to what that was like. I heard it was, a mania at the time when he was first running. But like I've seen that kind of happen with Justin here. And so and Trump is a really good marketer. He knows how to get people going. He knows how to galvanize his troops. I find the same thing with Trudeau. And then you said something at the beginning where it's like, he's not a moron. But is there other areas he's not the smartest in? Or do you feel like he's got the branding on point and there's other areas of policy that he just may not be that knowledgeable in, and then he's just kind of slipping on banana peels at times, and other times he's just flat out going flat on his face?
As far as the comparison to Trump, that's actually really funny because everyone says that Pierre is like a little make America great again politician. But in terms of like connecting with voters and creating that almost little army of supporters, people don't like the word TrueAnon, but it is an actual thing. And anyone that has ever pushed back against Trudeau has experienced that. They are like, I know I had a joke on Twitter the one day where I called it the TrueAnon Olympics or something. And I was like, touchdown, because like some of the things that they were saying was just like, it was just unhinged. Like, it was like, okay, you guys need to take a break from the internet because this guy doesn't even know you exist and he's not paying you to act like this. It's embarrassing for everybody involved. But some areas I think that he's actually...
Sorry. Yeah, no, you keep going. This is the reason why we stay muted while you're talking, because we're losing it over here.
We're dying.
Yeah.
The whole thing, it's embarrassing for everybody involved. I'm just like, yes, it's so true.
But continue.
Yeah. It's the Indigenous humor. Like, I'm always laughing, especially with like my haters. I will literally be laying in bed and I'll start laughing and I'll take like, you'll hear the screenshot sound and my husband will be like, who are you fighting with now? And I'm like, I have to screenshot that because I have to make like a scrapbook or something. Like, getting off topic, but there's one guy, I still laugh about it. He said something really rude to me on Twitter and I responded and I'm like, well, then why are you replying to me? And he's like, because Elon put you and your stupidity on my timeline. I love that for you. Like, Elon was sitting up there and was like, I'm going to just shove this shit in your face. But like, one fault of Trudeau, being more serious here, is he put way too much power in his chief of staff and he put way too much power in the people around him. And if you look at the chief of staff and director of communications with Trudeau, typically in the Harper years, he went through director of communications a lot more than Trudeau did. I think he's definitely made some big mistakes with where he's put all of his faith, especially his director of communications. Like, I know I've talked about this on Twitter, but I remember he got called out by that big TikToker, Chezaden or whatever his name is. He's got millions of followers. And it was like, he was in the House of Commons one day basically saying that's why Canadians are doing better than they ever have been. And that guy was like, where? Like, how are we doing better? And he lost it, had millions of views on his video. And it wasn't until like they saw a decrease in the polls where they started talking about affordability and how they're going to help Canadians. And I'm like, literally in like April, you were saying we were doing amazing, and everyone's just looking around like, who's doing amazing? Because even if I was the richest person on planet Earth, I could still be doing better if Trudeau wasn't at the helm. So I don't know, but
I mean, unless you're in his inner circle and getting some of the millions that have gone missing and go into your account. I'm just trying to figure out how I can get on his inner circle. I realized I probably should stop doing this podcast criticizing him, then maybe I could get the hookups. But
you had to develop the Arrive Can app, and then you
dude, I'm a designer by trade, right? So when I saw how much that went out for, and I was like, man, how could I have been a designer on this? I would have loved to collect some of that cash. Holy jumping.
You didn't even have to be a designer. I mean, I don't know if you saw like the interviews with the guy that was like, you know, it's me and my me and my partner, and they're like, well, what do you do? And he's like, well, I run the board, and that takes a lot of work, you know. And they're like, for two people, what do you do? And I was like, man, I'm a consultant. I could do that too. So we can all get in on this money. We'll start our own 3-person thing.
And then he was being questioned, and MP Larry Brock, one of the things that upsets me about committees is that unless MPs take a video bite from that committee, most people don't watch committees all day because it's really boring. But Larry Brock decided to do that because one of those designers, Larry Brock had asked him a question. He said, well, no, I had never been to his cottage. And he's like, yeah, you just admit. And he's like, well, no, he refers to it as a chalet. And it's like, that is the most elitist thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's like, what is it? Okay.
I get, like, from when I heard that, I was more so, I thought I only went down this because I'm on another Suits kick. So I've been watching the last 8 seasons of Suits. And so I'm like, from a law standpoint, brilliant. Like, no, I've never been to his cottage. And then you got to find a way to kind of skirt around that. But then, you know, they kind of pinned him down later. But I was like, if you're trying not to get caught, it's the way to get in the semantics, baby. It's how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So last but not least, we'll kind of get into this last bit of just chatting politics in this country in general. Do you think, we talked about this on our last episode, curious what your perspective would be on this. Do you think Poilievre would be a 1 or 2 term prime minister?
Depends what his numbers are like. I genuinely think that Canadians need to feel a difference to get unhappy and want to change their vote. If he comes in with big numbers, there's a chance that he goes 2 terms. But people are going to want to see that change right away. So big issues repealed, like the carbon tax, especially firearms owners are going to want to see immediately what he's going to do about that. Housing, I don't know if they're going to come out with some announcements on, you know, down payment assistance or whatever it might be, something to help with the housing crisis. And he's going to have to be quick. Political years are a lot shorter than people think. And anyone that's ever read Jody Wilson-Raybould's book, she talks about this. She says you get elected and then essentially you have 2 years to like get it done because legislation takes so long. So yeah, he'd have to be quick.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about like his comments too about like tying municipalities to housing, like their funding that they get and provinces funding that they get, tying it to actual like housing starts. And I wonder if because he's also talked about defunding the CBC and getting the media mad at him. And so I was kind of thinking like, okay, well, you know, he repeals the carbon tax right off the bat. And so then he's going to live in the glow of that for a couple of years. And then after that kind of fades, like I'm wondering if he's going to be looked at as the austerity prime minister because of all the cuts that he's kind of like promised that are coming to different things that he's said are, you know, being funded that shouldn't be, which may or may not be the case. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts about defunding the CBC are. So if you're willing to share that, I'd love to know. But yeah, because I had to flip flop on that myself a little bit just on what I thought and what I didn't think. But yeah, no, it's interesting. So I'm just wondering if after that kind of like that repeal of the carbon tax is kind of worn off, what do you think that he needs to do to kind of keep people entertained and happy and willing to vote him in for second term?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it's going to be making sure that he's listening to Canadians and that Canadians can actually see that and feel that. It doesn't all fall at the leader either. It falls on competent MPs. I know the Conservative Party has done this, and I think the Liberals have as well, where they like to put in parachute candidates and stuff like that. I think that's a huge mistake. I think electing people that are community involved and know their constituents and show up every day to fight for them, they will continue to get that vote. And I think that that's one of the things that the Liberals have had as an advantage is maybe they haven't been popular in the last 2 elections, but there's been MPs that have been out in those communities and have been showing up, and that's why they keep getting reelected. So
Exactly, because I'm just thinking about the fact that even in my own writing, like I know who the Liberal candidate is because I see his face all the time, but I don't have any idea who the Conservative candidate is, and I don't know who that candidate is. But
in some ways, I also think they've kind of given up on, I wouldn't say given up, but they don't, I find the Conservatives don't put much of an effort into an Atlantic Canada period. Like I just, like, you sometimes you get these politicians or these representatives who come in. I'm like, I've never seen you in my life, never heard of you in my life. And I think that's why they get creamed a lot out here in the Atlantic provinces. However, I'm seeing Sean Fraser's riding starting to flip on him, at least in the polls, which I didn't think I would actually see. Pictou County is pretty, they love their red. So I was interested in that. But last but not least, last question we'll end this off with. Do you see in any world a Chrystia Freeland Prime Minister?
Oh, that would be tough. I think that I don't know. Like I feel like you either love her or you hate her. Like, I don't know. I'm usually pretty tolerant. There's a couple MPs that could just like disappear forever and I would be fine with it. I don't want to say she's one of those people, but every time she talks, I'm like, why are you so condescending? And I remember tweeting one day, I was like, she is the most condescending person on planet Earth. And I had this like internet harasser from Surrey who used to love harassing me all the time. He actually like started being super racist towards me because I said Chrystia Freeland was condescending. So there are diehard like people out there that love her. So I don't know. It's hard to say.
What's it with the extremes on both sides, whether right or left, that they just all of a sudden like resort to racism? It's almost like the horseshoe just kind of touches at the top and they're the same person.
Yeah. And like, because they're liberals, it's okay. Like the amount of people that I've had like be racist towards me and I go to their like profile, it's like every child matters. I'm like, except for me. Like come on, that's so racist.
Gee, that's wild. Okay. Yeah. It's, did you ever watch any WWE growing up or anything like that?
My brother did, but like, he was one of those people. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I just had to take a shot. There was a character, Vicky Guerrero, back in the day, her whole shtick was she would interrupt mid-show with the most annoying voice. Excuse me. And I honestly think Chrystia Freeland's the version of that. Her voice is just nails on chalkboard. And then, as you said, she's super condescending and like, you can cut your Disney Plus. It'll make the difference. You're just like, get out of here. So,
I mean, didn't you love her commencement speech? I don't know if you saw that in the States.
Oh, yeah. I actually, she was basically like, fun time's over. Like, it was super dreary. I'm like, yay.
Yeah. She was just like, the world is in a bad place, and now it's up to you to fix it. Like, oh wow, that was hopeful.
Now we're gonna give the green light to bombing kids in Palestine. Yay! That's where our government is, right? So, anyways, I get you. I hear that out. Is there anything you like? Give you 30 seconds. Platform's yours. Whatever you want to say. Where do we follow you? Any last words you have for us?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything, but yeah, I'm on TikTok and Twitter, Jennifer Elle. I'm on Instagram, but my Instagram's mostly pictures of my dog. So unless you care about that, then, and memes, I'm always posting memes on there. So
iconic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we're so happy that you took the time out and just bestowing us with your knowledge. We really do wish you luck with your one-on-one with Poilievre in December. We look forward to kind of following your Twitter and seeing what the results of that are, as you promised you were going to tell us what happened. and we'll look forward to seeing more of you on social media.